must constantly look at things in a different way.
The Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast was created by two physical therapists out of the desire to learn more about the different educational roles in physical therapy and healthcare, and how healthcare education works by talking with educational leaders and people with different perspectives within physical therapy and across interdisciplinary lines on how education can be improved to disrupt the status quo of healthcare education. This is our journey, and thanks for listening. Are you a third-year physical therapy student that excels on tests when you have study guides, checklists, and deadlines? With all of the information available about how to prepare for the NPTE, it's easy to get disorganized and not feel prepared going into the big day. NPTE Prep Success is an online course that provides PT students easy-to-use study guides and step-by-step guidance through the NPTE preparation. To learn more, visit kylericeprep.com. Thank you again all for your continued support, and now for the show. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast. This is Brandon here. The following is a discussion that Dr. Mark Shepard and I actually had through Facebook Live on January 8, 2019. And the topic of this talk was really to talk about some of the current issues that are currently facing residency and fellowship programs with a particular focus on OMPT fellowship programs. Mark does a fantastic job breaking down the issues that have been going on and kind of getting an understanding of the fellowship programs and what they're going through. So I really highly recommend that you take a listen to this. And if you really want to watch the video with us as well, please feel free to check it out on my personal Facebook page or on the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast Facebook page. But without further ado, here's the discussion. Mark, I appreciate you joining me via Facebook Live today to talk about these issues and such, and I appreciate your time. I realize that there might be some people out there who are watching this video who perhaps don't know who you are. Would you mind just giving the listeners just a little bit of some background into who you are and kind of what you're up to?
Yeah, so thanks for, first of all, bringing me on for Facebook Live, and appreciate the people who are joining in the conversation. But I work with Dr. Julie Whitman at Bellin College. Hey, Lindsay. Just a great institution. I'm lucky enough to be part of a fellowship program that has deep roots for the past 10 years, and super passionate about progressing practice in a way that will help our patients in the long run. So that's kind of, I guess, a short-term look on what I do, but we'll keep it at that.
Awesome, man. And I did forget to mention this little disclaimer in the beginning. I am actually currently a fellow in training with the Bellin College Fellowship Program. But Mark, before we dive into these issues and such, let's kind of break it down for the listeners here just to kind of get an understanding of how fellowship programs operate and kind of what it's like and what you have to do in the program. So would you mind kind of sharing a little bit about how fellowship programs operate and kind of what you have to do from your role to kind of keep it going to the level that it is?
Yeah, I think there's different facets of what happened in, running a fellowship program. Dr. Julie Whitman and I have luckily worked together for many years now, and I've been under her mentorship for, just as many years. But I think the things, at least at Bellin, we really, truly feel is super important is just, making sure that we come alongside fellows to mentor them and make sure that they progress through the program. And of course, there's obviously the regulations and making sure accreditation-wise we're meeting those standards. So those are kind of the two facets that come to play from an operations side. And then beyond that, you have working with faculty to make sure that they're developing, that they're teaching the skill set up to par for what you're looking for in your program, and just looking to align to meet your goals for the program, as well as making sure that you're reaching the outcomes of the program, whatever that may be. And of course, for OMPT fellowship, at least at Bellin, it's the ability to perform skills, but also it's the ability for you to have essential clinical reasoning skills that are so important, I think, in clinical practice.
Yeah, Mark. So let's just dive right in here. So obviously, with you being assistant fellowship program director, working with Julie Whitman, at least from our program, would you mind sharing the changes that have been taking place through ABTRI, AOMPT, and IFOMPT, and any other organization that has a role for that matter, when it comes to orthopedic fellowship regulation and administrative tasks that have been taking place since you've been involved with the program?
Yeah, so I first kind of want to just say that I wholeheartedly think that accreditation is super important, and we need a checks and balance system on any program. I've been through CAPTI processes, and really, as much as people can say that it's a really rigorous process, it's for the better. So I think having accreditation processes makes a really important process when you're coming through and making sure programs are up to snuff. So when we look at some of the changes that have taken place, I think from at least our perspective, and I'm talking mainly from Bellin College, we fully feel that some of the changes that have happened recently are potentially bringing on some struggles within the OMPT realm. And it goes really beyond just fellowship. It affects any ABTRI related programs. So we have residency programs, not just in orthopedic realm, but you have people, that are in cardiac residencies, geriatric, and then other fellowship programs that are beyond OMPT. So some of these changes really relate to clinical sites and where the mentorship occurs, as well as the admissions criteria that we feel starts to actually decrease the growth abilities that APTA says that they would like to do. So that's kind of our viewpoint on some of the major changes that have been going on. The tough thing, at least when it comes to OMPT fellowship, is that we actually have to meet accreditation standards and regulations, not only from an APTA or ABTRI, but also through IFOMPT. So when you look at, part of what every program director has to deal with and folks who coordinate the fellowships, we have to make sure not only that you're getting the appropriate accreditation, standards for one, but also the other. So the challenge then becomes that, one, you stay on top of any changes that come up, as they occur. And secondly, you have to go with the more rigorous standards. And sometimes, often, at least in OMPT fellowships, they don't always align. IFOMPT may be more stringent on certain aspects, and ABTRI might be more stringent on certain aspects. So those are challenges that fellowships for years have had to deal with. But it's something that, as I've come into my role now as, kind of a novice, so to speak, that it's challenging to stay on top of all that. So that's one perspective there, and then there's changes in hours for mentorship. There might be, 130 hours for some fellows if you started at this point, and then 150 if you start after. So there's a lot of moving pieces because things change all the time. And so that makes it kind of challenging for some individuals to stay on top of all those things. So that's something, at least, that we in OMPT fellowships are really trying to stay on top of. And luckily, program directors across all of our programs really bound together to help each other out and say, hey, did you see this change? Make sure that you're checking that out.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly makes sense that having to appeal to both of those standards could certainly be time consuming and challenging at times. And, I know we're going to have ABTRI on in the near future, along with representative from AOMPT on to discuss this next question a little bit more in depth. But from your perspective and your understanding of the accreditation bodies, what is the reasoning behind these changes that you had mentioned earlier that these accrediting bodies have made regarding OMPT fellowship programs?
Yeah, so it's hard to say what the actual perspective and viewpoint is. So I will speak from my opinion, and I'm not really doing this for other OMPT fellowships, but the vision I think that APTA has is this idea that we are going to move from DPT to mandatory residencies, and then the ability to go on to fellowship training. So when we look at this from a continuum of education, you see that it's very similar to the medical model. While there's a number of different individuals that agree with that, there's also a fair bit of people who say, I don't know if that's really the best route to go. And there's a number of different arguments about DPT education and the cost of education, and so on and so forth. But what I think is happening from a standpoint of vision is that we would follow that approach to go through, residency to fellowship training. So when we look at the requirements, the new requirements, if we want to get specific, it's admission criteria 4.2.4, and that basically says that in order to start a fellowship, you have to be board certified. So to give you some perspective, right now as it stands, you do not have to be board certified to go into a fellowship. You can be residency trained, you can be board certified, or there is something known as the skills track. The skills track is essentially the program director or admissions team to look through your portfolio and say, you have gone through enough clinical experience that you are ready for fellowship training. What AbTree is saying is they're going to eliminate the skills track. So come 2020, January 1, a year from now, you will have to be residency trained or hold a board certification to get into a fellowship program. Now, there's some individuals who say, well, that's great. That's following the medical model. That's what they do. But the issue here is that, look, there's not a lot of people coming into fellowship programs that have these certifications. And some fellowships it really affects. It doesn't necessarily affect Bellin College as much as others. And from when Julie and I talk, we say, look, if it's affecting our fellow OMPT programs, it's affecting us as a whole. We're here together because we want to make programs better. We want to try to better our profession. So when we see our friends on the other side saying, look, we might shut down our program because we have 10% of our spots coming in with OCS or residency, we're not going to financially be able to stay afloat. That disturbs me, and it disturbs Julie. And we feel very strongly that there needs to be good reasoning beyond just saying, well, we're going to do what the physicians have done. Who says that's the right way? Who says that's the right way? And furthermore, a lot of program directors have come together to say, what does that change fix? Why does that change in that admissions criteria make a difference in the people to be effective in fellowship training? So I think that for one is a big issue that many of the program directors are saying, look, we might shut our doors. And I don't want to be dramatic here, but it is going to happen. And that is completely different than what the APTA vision is. And so we're shooting ourselves, like we've done time and time again, we're shooting ourselves in our foot. And so that, along with this change in curricular mentorship oversight, is just going to really delay growth and affect programs that are just trying to make our profession better. So it really is ruffled feathers, to say the least.
Yeah, and Mark, while we're on the subject of talking about different fellowship programs, I'm just curious here, is there any evidence that really says that the outcomes of fellows with programs that maybe produce a high number of fellows compared to the average, is there any evidence that they are any worse than maybe programs that are just producing kind of what we would consider an average number of fellows, just to kind of gain some context on, are there really drastic differences between programs like this?
No, and that's kind of been our thought. Now, AbTree, has said that they've opened up a window of commenting for program directors and others to basically put their voice forward. And Elaine Longman, who's on this, I think, has done an outstanding job, along with Cameron McDonald from Regis, to really try to bridge those communication lines between AbTree and the fellowship programs. But from our perspective, and again, this is our perspective, we're not being heard. essentially what we are being told is that, look, there was a consultant who came into AbTree to better align their processes, and they basically said, well, this is how other people are doing it, so why don't you do it? So our perspective is AbTree's listening to some outside consultants and not listening to the very people who make up the organization. So to me, why would you make these changes without really hearing us out on some of these major issues that will delay growth in some of the most important components of training? So that concerns me.
You know, I should have asked this beforehand. You talked about kind of how fellowships operate from that standpoint, but let's talk a little bit about the thing that really runs it, and that's finances. So how do fellowships operate financially, and are many programs profiting, breaking even, or operating at a loss currently?
Yeah, I think it's hard to basically say how other programs are running, but I think there's sometimes a perception that these post-professional programs are raking in the cash, so to speak. But there's many programs out there who are just breaking even, especially in OMPT fellowship programs where there's not a ton of people. DPT programs are, they're high tuition. You get a lot of people in there. Those tend to be profitable. But OMPT programs tend to, either break even or make enough to cover their operating costs. So a lot of us are around really just for the betterment of the profession and understand that we're training a lot of the individuals who go into clinic, produce research, and teach. So there's a pay forward, whether there's an OMPT fellowship associated with the institution as an entry-level program or so on and so forth. So that's what's tough is like you look at the red line here and there's a lot of programs that are operating close to that. So when you have changes that affect that bottom line, it can really put people under very quickly. So there's not a big buffer there, unfortunately, in these things.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. And, Mark, I kind of want to go back to the changes and the requirements that AbTree and APTA have kind of mandated with those changes there. So let's get specifically to kind of get a cause and effect relationship here, to kind of dive a little bit more in depth on how it's going to affect everyone involved with the fellowship, so including directors, the fellowship mentors, but also the fellows in training, just to see how this affects everything.
Yeah, so when we look at, we talked about the admissions criteria and really that will affect future prospective fellows coming in. Essentially, if you don't have residency training, if you don't have your OCS, you can't start a fellowship starting in 2020. So, that affects a lot of programs, in the way that they're trying to get people in at this point. And obviously growth opportunities. But the second one I haven't really talked as much about is this item. It's called item 13.4 if you're looking at the jargon, but it's basically what constitutes a change in the curriculum. So right now as it stands, anytime you add a clinical site, you have to get it approved per AbTree, which makes complete sense, right? Wherever you're adding a site for mentorship, you should make sure that it's appropriate, that the mentors are appropriate, and that the site is appropriate. So right now, we basically send in, within 30 days of that site coming on to provide mentorship, you send in what's called a substantive change form. That form basically has information about the mentor, it has the location of the clinic, and a couple other details. And then AbTree looks over it and approves that process. So right now it can be somewhat efficient. Obviously things can be quicker, but right now it goes in that fashion. Starting this year, actually as of January 1st, that has changed. Essentially, if you add more than 3 sites to your program, you have to go through a much more extended process. You have to basically submit paperwork to AbTree that says, hey, we're adding this mentorship site. Now AbTree has to basically, when they meet, which is quarterly, it's not monthly or anything like that, and they have communicated that they would try to meet more consistently, but at this point it's when they meet quarterly. You get approved to basically say, all right, now you can start mentoring, but before we do any of that, we need to actually do a site visit. So they need to go to that clinical site and observe the mentorship that's occurring. And the issue here is that now the programs that are hybrid in nature, and there's a number of those that have grown in the post-professional world, which is awesome, but those hybrid programs, those multi-site programs, add clinical sites like every week. Like last year, we added like probably between 20 and 30 sites last year. So if you look at a site visit, 20 to 30 every year on average, and Abtree says that's going to be about $550 per site visit. You add that up, that's costs that are not in budgets currently. Plus that doesn't take into account, the cost for having a representative go there if that's needed, and other costs associated with the admin time to keep track of all that stuff. It's sad that pretty much all of December, I spent most of my time along with Julie trying to keep on track of the mentorship stuff and plan ahead for all these changes, rather than work on curricular development, rather than reach out to the fellows in training so I can prep them for year-end stuff. I just don't understand why the site visits are needed in the way that they're trying to progress those. And the frustration on my end is, again, the question of what are they fixing here? What is going wrong right now that needs this change? And to my knowledge, when we talk to other program directors, have you ever been told that you shouldn't add a site? Most of them say no, we've never been denied. And the other point is, who's to say that a clinical site, like what makes a clinical site so great? Isn't the mentorship more important than the actual physical site? I would argue that there's a lot of great mentorship happening in Iraq, happening in Germany in the military settings, and they're just using a couple of TheraBands, a yoga mat, and other things. And you can talk to Julie about mentorship that's occurred in very unique institutions and locations. And just because they have a lot of square footage doesn't mean anything. I would rather see the interactions between the mentor and the mentee. So right now, Abtree requires in any hybrid program, you have to have video documentation of the mentorship occurring. Why is that not good enough right now? Why do we need to physically go to the site? I feel like I'm going back to like the 18th century when look what we're doing right now. Like, why does this not work? Why do taking pictures or videotaping session, what is so different about that than actually being there live? So the frustrations have gotten to a point of, all right, it's creating an admin burden, it's creating financial burden, it's creating a time-based burden. Like, what's going to give here? So the frustrations have gotten to a point where we feel like we've had to take steps in a certain direction with Abtree to basically let them know that these changes are not acceptable and they're actually going to prevent growth. So that's where we are on some of those things.
Yeah, and from speaking more from the fellow in training perspective, if that does hypothetically take place, that majority, all that money that's going to be needed to pay for those site visits, it's going to have to come from the fellows.
Absolutely.
I mean, the price is going to have to be raised. And, with the debt level that we have coming out right now, just as students, and then if we have to go through, if someone had to go through an OCS or a residency, that's already a significant price already. And then the fellowship's going to be even more. So there's just some serious financial considerations and implications that this would have if this were to go through. So I think that's a really important point to bring out too.
Yeah, and that's exactly part of it is, at the turn of every point is we don't want to add any more financial burden to anybody who's coming through any extra training. Like, you look at probably one of the biggest barriers to post-professional training, it's finances, right? First of all, we have 3-year programs that are a cash cow for ripping, funds from individuals who have a number of loans. And so, to go on and do residency training and then go on to do fellowship training, if you add any more onto that, it's less attractive for people to get into. And I'm all about elevating the profession in a way that will get people more, I want people to come in and do residency and fellowship training. I'm all for it. But if the cost is adding more load onto people, I get it. Like, in this day and age, if I don't have that financial support, I would not have done it. And to even say from my experience when I went through, if I didn't have hybrid education or multi-site type of approach, I wouldn't have done fellowship training. And to me, it makes me sad to even think that that's a possibility, because how many other students and prospective people who would come in, support AOMPT, support our profession, support the vision, are not doing it because of those very reasons.
No, and I think that's a good point, Mark, and I'm sure that's actually quite prevalent. I mean, I'm the same way myself. I couldn't really get up and just leave and just go to a traditional brick and mortar program because, I mean, have family here. I just can't get up and do that. So, obviously there have been some concerns that have been brought up here, but what has the dialogue been between programs and the accrediting bodies regarding some of these things?
Yeah, so, I think as we've seen these changes happen over the past couple of years, it's been really neat to see what's happened. I think when we look at program directors for fellowship programs, we've really come together, and it's just been, out of this kind of adversity, if you will. The thing that I've been really excited about is you look at these different fellowship programs that you would think would be competitive with each other to try to get all these folks to come to their programs. We've really said, you know what, we need to band together to try to come up with solutions and work together with AbTree to try to come up with a situation to make things better. So I think what I've liked about this out of these types of adversity is that we've basically come together to write a letter, and along with Bellin College's OMPT fellowship, we have 12 other fellowships who have joined in this letter, and the letter basically puts out all of our concerns, the financial concerns, the logistical concerns, and other concerns based off of the admissions criteria. So it's just really cool to see kind of those things, and out of the 26 programs that are part of OMPT fellowship that are out there, 20 of the programs have basically said that they oppose this particular new policy. So we've really tried to do diligence on our end to survey those programs to try to get a good pulse check and just know this isn't just Bellin College or Regis or some other program out there that's trying to go rogue. It's a number of programs coming together. So I think that's been a great component. But we sent a letter in to AbTree basically saying what our concerns were. And at this point in time, if our concerns are not heard and met, we are looking at other options for accreditation and potentially leaving AbTree to go on to another accreditation body, because we've just at a point where it's critical for survival, it's critical for our growth. So we hope that AbTree hear our concerns. I have to say that Kendra, who is the kind of point person between the board and has been very open and helpful. So I don't want to point fingers at any one person, but we hope that they hear our concerns and understand that this affects much more than maybe they originally were thinking.
Right, and hopefully there can be an agreement together among both parties so that this can get situated out. But Mark, in the event that it doesn't, you kind of had mentioned that obviously having to look through other methods for accreditation. So obviously there's probably a lot of fellows out there, or maybe even people that are like, man, if that happens, what do I do? Like, will I become accredited if I want to go for this program? So do you mind touching a little bit on maybe what the outlook would be from an accreditation standpoint, like more with AOMPT, IFOMPT, or any other accrediting organization that would perhaps be involved next, if that were to happen?
Yeah, and I think we're exploring our options, but the thing that we feel very strongly about, the programs that have come together, is we want to align with AOMPT. We want to align with IFOMPT for sure. Those standards that are put forth are very much our bread and butter. But we also very strongly believe in what APTA's vision is. We want to work with APTA through AbTree. We cannot be burdened by some of these things. So I think we're still looking at options for that. But we want to work with the Academy of Orthopedic Physical Therapy. We're in close contact with the AOMPT board and looking for their support, which has been great. But right now, it's just so early in the process to really understand like what's going to happen. So our wish is that AbTree will say, look, we didn't think about these things, and we'll have the dialogue there. But there's a good chance that things won't change, and we're very serious about the repercussions of what that is. And if we leave these programs, that's almost 300 fellowship slots. I mean, that is like 90% of the available training positions annually. So that's a large chunk of accredited AbTree. I mean, this isn't just like two programs saying like we're going rogue, we're sick of this. It is a major consensus, as some people have noted.
Yeah, no, clearly. And, keeping in mind the accrediting body's perspective and fellowship program's perspective, what do you think are the best steps or actions that should be taken to really fulfill the needs or mission of these accrediting bodies and programs to really advance fellowship education and PT? Like, what do we need to do together? How can we best work together to really advance fellowship? Like, what should we be focusing on?
I think we should be focusing on keeping things easy, right? I think these policies need to be basically, taken away. I think we need to look, and if AbTree feels very strongly about a certain intent of why these are there needs to be more discussion on what their background is, and they need to hear our concerns more fully before they're implemented. So I think that's kind of the short answer, but I think at the end of the day, what most program directors and coordinators want is to be able to work on their program, be able to interact with their fellows, be able to mentor, be able to provide curricular oversight, make sure that our goals and outcomes are being met, and basically living up to the standards that both AOMPT, IFOMPT, and AbTree at this point put forward. But what grinds our gears is this over reliance on admin burden that just, you got to hire another person to just take care of mentorship. I mean, it's like, I get the oversight needs, but again, the question everybody should be asking essentially is, what are these changes, what are they improving upon? And right now, nobody really, from our standpoint, has a good answer other than, well, there was a consultant who came in and said we should do it this way. And to me, it's like, that's not good enough. Hopefully these policies are rescinded, and basically we go back to talking about, how to make things either stay the same or even how they are now, how we can make them more efficient and get with the times, where technology is on our side.
No, I agree with you, Mark. And, you've kind of answered a little bit of my next question in the one you had just said, but obviously you kind of mentioning, and we know that there's got to be a balance between appropriate oversight and administrative stuff versus also, because we also don't want programs to just have a free-for-all and everyone's just doing everything and it's unregulated. So what is that Goldilocks zone between appropriate oversight from an accrediting body and autonomous efforts of the program?
Yeah. It's hard to say, and I think, Joe Brent's brought up a good point. Like, you kind of look to CAPTI, right? Because obviously CAPTI has a number of different standards and elements that require, PT programs to have certain aspects in their program. But when you look at the oversight of AbTree, does CAPTI come and do site visits for every single site, for every single program? I mean, it's absurd to even think that they would do that. That responsibility falls among the DCE. So the responsibility falls on the program to ensure that the site lives up to the standards set by CAPTI. So I think Goldilocks zone, when you think about that, why isn't AbTree following in those steps? If you think about CAPTI, they have a whole lot more risk because we're looking at non-licensed individuals. I mean, at fellowship level, I mean, these people are licensed, right? They're clinicians. They're licensed. They have the bare minimum safety standards, and obviously, if they're going through fellowship, they should have a lot more under their belt than just the bare minimum. So I think that needs to be considered. Why are they coming in and micromanaging these clinical sites? And I think some of the other components from oversight is, again, why do you have to micromanage that? And why are you changing these standards in a way that are making things more challenging for people to progress their careers? And we all know millennials are coming into the workforce. Millennials we want a career ladder, right? And so if we're starting to reduce the ability for these to be out there, what's that going to mean for a workforce that is craving this type of thing? And we have plenty of mentors who want to provide that. So stop micromanaging is pretty much what we're looking at here.
Yeah, and I think another point to bring up on this is that, obviously, even just looking at evidence within residency and fellowships too, because looking at outcomes and seeing, are we doing okay? If we're doing okay, then good. But I think, there's not a whole lot of research on that. I mean, there was the one with Rodriguero and the others, and of course, co-author Julie Whitman, and I just don't know how much a lot of evidence we have, and I think we need more of that to help figure that out one way or the other.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of, Julie and I have been doing a lot of work on looking at the qualitative effects of fellowship training, and there was just recently a article our team worked on that was published in JMMT that looked at some of those personal and professional aspects from fellowship. And if you look through that article, it just shows some of the changes that occur from fellowship, and it's like, if these effects are happening, it's not just happening in our fellowship program, it's happening in every one of them. So again, when we look at outcomes, what is happening right now that's causing, treachery in our ability to do what we're doing? Why change something that's working fine? And so that frustrates us, and those outcomes don't really support the policies that are coming in. And something I wanted to bring up too that kind of makes me chuckle is, the admissions criteria for fellowship is requiring, and again, 2020, that each person come in with either residency training or OCS. But if you start to look at what the standards are per AbTree for mentors, you can have a fellow mentor who is qualified to be mentoring a fellow in training who has 2 years of clinical experience. So to me, my question is, why can you have a mentor who does not have their OCS or residency trained and has 2 years of clinical experience mentor someone who you require to come into the program with those credentials? It makes completely just backwards sense on there. So again, I don't know how well these have been thought through and those pieces there, but there's a lot of holes that I think are being punched into this thing that I think AbTree needs to consider.
For sure, and it definitely seems like there's a big consensus on this. I mean, 20 out of 26, that's a big majority. Well, guys, I'd like to kind of open up to questions because we kind of wanted to get through an overall view of this, and this has been a good discussion too. But if anyone has any other specific questions or things to bring up, to discuss, to kind of just have some other things to talk about, feel free to send us a question in the comments and Mark will ask them. Mark will answer them, excuse me. Okay, so Jay Meyerson has asked, what did AbTree make these changes? Jay, do you mean why, or what changes did they make? Okay, what was their purpose for these changes?
Yeah, Jay, and that's kind of our question still is, and we've been asking this for over a year now, particularly for the admissions criteria, but what intent do these changes have? And we just, the answer we've been getting is, we've had a consultant that's worked with AbTree to come in and review our procedures and policies, and this is what they have suggested for the admissions to better align, and for site visits, this is how they've done it. So that's kind of been our answer, at least from AbTree. So we want data. We're evidence-based practitioners. We want evidence-based decisions, and right now that just has not been given. And quite honestly, the evidence is probably shifting to say that our outcomes are doing just fine, so why change anything? Yeah, Julie says these are industry standards, which again, who says that industry standards are the right way to do things, So.
It's a fair point. All right, looks like Eddie submitted his question. This is a long one here. So, let's went there. Okay, do you see AOMPT APTA changing their stance of PTAs being able to perform joint mobilizations and manipulations? To my current understanding, AOMPT says no manips because it requires constant evaluation and reevaluation. Parentheses, which is debatable. I'd argue it's assessment and reassessment. APTA says just no joint mobs at all. Do you see that changing, and or would you support that change? Ooh, big question.
Man, Eddie with throwing it down. So, I've been through a journey with this question, Eddie. Just a little perspective. I was a PTA program director for 3 years, and I started that program really because I was very critical of PTAs. I decided that I'd stop whining and kind of moaning about PTAs and try to do something to better our profession, and so developed a program, with that. And part of the struggle was CAPTE says, well, you can do grade 1 and 2, low amplitude, and then you look at AOMPT, APTA, and their position statements are very clear on what is out there. So short answer is I don't think those position statements will change. And it's taken me a while to come around to certain ways because I can see both aspects of the argument. But what I would say, Eddie, to you as a PTA student or PTA out there, there's really bigger fish to fry. I think when we look at manual therapy, it's very effective for a number of individuals. But my thought on the future for PTAs is not so much of becoming these manual therapists, but really owning exercise, really owning the ability to take pain neuroscience education and health and wellness and work within the plan of care to bring that out. I think you guys are better utilized in that way. Let the physical therapist deal with some of the manual therapy, the traditional manual therapy, joint mobs, thrust manipulation, and some can argue that doing passive range of motion is manual therapy, which I can see that argument. But at the end of the day, you guys are so important to really bringing that plan of care to life. But you guys should be super excited about just owning exercise, owning that component of the plan of care, moving just beyond doing, modalities. I can't believe how much CAPTE, looks at these modalities for PTA education. But I think in the programs I've been associated with, we really strive to get you guys to have a reasoning approach within your scope of practice, within the plan of care dictated by the physical therapist. But I would rather see you guys own the ability to appropriately load patients within the plan of care, but also be able to provide modern pain education. And to me, that's the most exciting component of it. Like, hands-on is great, but at the end of the day, we have to empower patients. We have to get them to move. We have to load their bodies and their nervous system so that they can get back to function. PTAs most definitely fill it in there. So I kind of, see the argument, but at the end of the day, I'm kind of like, let's move on and let's empower PTAs to work within their scope of practice and just get them really good at modern pain neuroscience and get them outstanding at exercise and just get the communication between PTs and PTAs there. Because quite honestly, I learned more about what PTAs do as being a program director than I did in even PT school. And we talk about interprofessional education. Let's talk about intra-professional education and understanding what a PTA does. So sorry for that soapbox there, Eddie, but that's kind of my stance from my perspective. So.
No, it's a good question. Mark, we got Baron Tang Sr. who says, I might have missed this if this was discussed, but should things move to the next level and a majority of fellowships leave Aptree, how will these programs proceed with approving sites mentors in the interim that are currently in limbo?
So, yeah, I think, I would say you just continue with doing with what we've been doing, looking at being able to approve the mentors the way we have been. I think video sessions and understanding and viewing recordings of mentor sessions is appropriate. I think we've been doing that for the past several years. Like, why change that component? The paperwork that comes along with it, I don't necessarily feel like it's necessary. I'd rather spend my time making sure that there's a clear agreement between fellow in training and that particular mentor versus making sure that the clinic sees a certain amount of patients here and there per body region. and I'd rather spend my time being able to view the mentorship, give feedback to mentorship. So, I think doing things the way they are right now has been okay. I mean, for the most part, why make it more challenging than it needs to be?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And Mark, we got finished up with the last question here. Lindsay has brought this one up. I think this is an interesting question. Is there an ability to have trained point men, point women within each fellowship trained by AppTree to approve mentors to control quality insights and save money?
Yeah, I think there's definitely that opportunity. And, I have the ability to work with Lindsay very closely, and Lindsay definitely helps in that process. In our program, we have what's called a fellow mentor leader, and these individuals work very intimately with our fellows in training and help with mentorship oversight and review. So we have multiple eyes from multiple perspectives, not only from the program director, but also from recent graduates. So I think, there's definitely that ability. But again, I think you should leave that up to the programs to ensure. Why micromanage from an accreditation standpoint what programs do to make sure their mentors are appropriate? It's like babysitting us to do our job. If we're accredited, then we must be doing something right, or our program must be meeting the minimum standards. So I think there needs to be less oversight and more trust in the programs to provide the oversight of mentorship to make sure that it's up to snuff.
That's a good point. No, it's a good point. Well, Mark, thanks for coming on again, man. It's really good to kind of get this discussion out there and share this to the masses, because I know there's a lot of people within the programs, those within the professional organizations that know a little bit about this, but perhaps the greater outside PT community is maybe not aware of these issues. So thank you for your time and effort to bring this awareness to the audience and for answering the questions. Really appreciate it, man.
No problem. Thanks for letting me have a voice here, and appreciate everything you do for getting out this type of stuff. And hopefully people are a little bit more aware of some of these things and frustrations and challenges that we've had. But I just want to echo the point that it's not just OMPT programs. This is affecting all fellowship and residency programs across the board. And I have a number of different friends that work in, cardiopulmonary fellowships who have the same sentiments. So I don't want this to become, it's just, manual therapy fellowships. There's a number of manual therapy fellowships, but I hate to see this happening to our colleagues across the board. I'm very passionate about post-professional, and I want the discussion to continue. I want AppTree to consider these points, and essentially I want things to be easy. Less is not better, more is not better, better is better, and I don't think we're at that point now.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's a really good point. Well, thank you also to all the listeners for hopping on and taking a listen, and some great comments, some great questions. That always makes this go very well. If you guys also have know people, or perhaps some people that aren't aware about this, feel free to share out this video when you're done, when it's all uploaded and stuff. Spread the word, get more awareness out there, because I think the more everyone understands and knows what's kind of going on, just the more we can all be on the same page. But thank you again all, and we are signing off. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Access to healthcare is one of the largest issues facing both providers and patients, as millions of people worldwide lack timely and affordable access to healthcare. Anywhere Healthcare, a telehealth platform, is a simple, low-cost option for providers and patients that eliminates the barriers to access to all kinds of healthcare. To find out more, check out anywhere.healthcare, which is available on our show notes. And if you use the code HET in all caps when you email to sign up, you'll save 25% off the total cost. Thank you for attending class today, and we hope that you learned something and gained value from the content.
If you'd like to schedule office hours with us, feel free to add us on Twitter at HET Podcast, on Instagram, HET Podcast, on Facebook, the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast, and the homepage, healthcareeducationtransformationpodcast.com.
And for those of you following along in the syllabus, extra credit can be obtained by liking us, sharing us, and leaving a review.
Let's continue our journey up Mount Educational Success as lifelong learners.